Late summer of 1827 put a strange kind of light on the upper green. The sun came down slantwise over the Wind River Range, turning every ridge and cutbank the color of old brass. Cottonwoods along the river already showed a hint of yellow, the way they do when the nights start to sharpen but the days still smell of warm mud and willow bark. Beaver sign was thinning. So were the men who had come to take them. Elias Boone Hardesty stood in the shallows, water numbing his moccasined feet, and watched his last 3 traps come up nearly empty. One young beaver, hide chewed where another had worried at it, and 2 sprung irons with nothing between the jaws. It had been like that all along, the fork sign high on the banks where old dams had gone rotten, tracks grown faint, slides gone to grass. The beaver were learning, or leaving, or both. From the rise behind him, someone called, "How's the pickin', bear bait?" The name drifted down with the dry smell of sage, and horse sweat, and a little laughter. Elias did not look back. He took his time working the trap, easing the iron open, fingers careful and sure. The river had taught him slowness. Bears had taught him the cost of haste. "Light," he answered, finally, his voice carrying just enough to be heard. "Light as your wits, McCrae." That got a few more laughs at McCrae's expense this time. The men on the rise, 6 free trappers and 1 company man, went back to sorting plues and arguing over who owed what to whom. Their camp lay scattered along a bench above the green, a half-circle of smoky fires, travois poles, and brush-woven shelters. Beyond, the Wind Rivers rose in layers of blue, their snowfields thin and ragged at summer's end. Elias slung the lone beaver over his shoulder and climbed up the bank. His left side still ached when he went uphill, where the muscles pulled over old scars. 2 years had passed since the Yellowstone bear. The story had long since outrun the truth, as such tales do. In some versions he had run from a she-grizzly and fallen into her den like a fool. In others he had tried to pet a cub. All anyone kept was the name Bear Bait. Easy to remember, easy to spit. The real story lived in the 4 white gouges that ran from collarbone to ribcage under his buckskin shirt, and in the way he watched the brush whenever the wind shifted. Those details were for him alone. He dropped the beaver beside the stretcher poles, where green hides lay stacked like wet bark. "That all?" McCrae asked, chewing on a twist of tobacco. "That's all," Elias said. "River's near trap to gristle. Smith's trails will fatten up again," McCrae said with the easy faith of a man who had not read a map in his life. "Beaver don't vanish. They just paddle off a spell." Elias thought of Jedediah Smith's bold line of travel, from the Platte to the Great Salt Lake to California and back again. Smith's journals spoke, in their quiet scriptural way, of country beyond any man's reckoning. But they did not promise endless beaver. "Maybe," Elias said, "maybe they just learned the smell of iron and white men both." A quarrel started up at the far end of camp, near the horses. A shout, a string of French curses, then English. "I told you, he was near dead when I found him." Elias turned with the others. A young engagé from Street Louis, one of the company's green men, came stumbling into view, leading a sway-backed pony. Strapped over the pony's withers was a bundle that did not move. Closer, Elias saw it was a man, or what was left of one. The stranger lay belly down across the saddle, arms dangling, black hair matted to his neck with sweat and dust. His shirt, once white, was the color of road dust, torn at the shoulders. Sun-cracked skin pulled tight over high cheekbones. His boots, if they could be called that, were a strange make. Rawhide wrapped around the ankles in the old Spanish style Elias had seen once or twice down country. He was stumbling along the willows by himself, the engagé said, half proud, half spooked. "Talking crazy. Thought he was going to drop in the river." McCrae stepped forward, squinting. "Mex?" he asked. "Or Injun?" The stranger's eyes fluttered open. They were dark and veined red, but there was a sharpness behind them still. "Ni Mexicano," he rasped, in a voice scraped thin by thirst. "Ni ut?" "Both." He tried to spit, but his mouth was dry. "Get me down, fools!" Elias moved before the others could. He untied the ropes and eased the man off the pony, feeling how little weight there was to him. Up close, he could see signs of hard travel. Lips split wide, nose peeling from sun, a cough that rattled when he breathed. But he also saw something else, a cord around the man's neck, disappearing under his shirt. They laid him on a buffalo robe near Elias's fire. Someone brought a kettle of coffee and a dipper of river water. Elias lifted the man's head, trickled water along his tongue, then the coffee. The stranger shuddered, then sucked greedily at the dipper. When he tried to sit, he gasped and clutched at his chest. "Easy," Elias said. "You're stove up. Where from?" The man's eyes tracked his face, measuring. "From the south," he said finally, in a Spanish lilt broken by Ute consonants. "Too far south to name for men of Beaver." That got a ripple of amusement from the crowd, but Elias did not smile. Instead, he reached gently for the cord at the man's neck. "May I?" he asked. The stranger hesitated, then nodded. Elias drew out a bundle the size of a man's fist, folded rawhide, sweat-stained and stiff. It had been bound and rebound so often the edges curled like old bark. On the outside someone had pressed a sign into the hide, a small cross, flared at the ends in the old Castilian fashion. "Holy trinkets," McCrae snorted. "Priests' keepsake." Elias did not answer. He unwrapped the rawhide with careful fingers. Inside lay a sheet of thinner skin, scraped almost to parchment. On it, in faded brown ink and charcoal, ran lines and symbols. Not just any lines, trails, ridges, rivers, sharp angles where mountains turned. And scattered among them, tiny symbols, a clustered grouping of 5 dots, repeated again and again, a pick and shovel crudely drawn, a sunburst over a canyon mark. Along the bottom margin, in cramped script, ran words in Castilian Spanish. "Mapa," the stranger whispered. "Mapa de las minas del Rey Carlos. No es para los ojos de cualquier perro de pieles." Map of the mines of King Charles, not for the eyes of any fur dog. Half the men around the fire snorted at that. "Spanish mines up here?" one said. "That's like sayin' a cat built Fort Union." "More like a drunken padre's doodle," McCrae added. "I could draw you a dozen such on a buffalo bladder after 2 nights with 1,000 rotgut." Laughter rolled around the circle. Elias barely heard it. He had seen something like this before. Not the same map, but the same hand, the same habit of mind. 2 winters earlier, sitting by a smoky fire near the Sweetwater, he had shared coffee with Jedediah Smith himself. Smith had shown him a page from his journal copied from an even older scrap given by Mexican guides, a rough tracing of routes the Spaniards once dared. North of Santa Fe, the ink had been neater, the crosses smaller, but the odd habit of marking mineral veins with 5 dots stuck in Elias's mind. Here, on this stranger's hide map, were those same clusters of 5 dots. Here were the little pickaxes. Here a line of cramped script. Más allá del cañón de las piedras ardientes, beyond the canyon of the burning stones. "Las minas del Rey Carlos," the stranger murmured, pointing with a shaking finger. "Buried when your grandfathers were yet unborn. Silver and more than silver. But cursed. The canyon burns. Men who go do not come back. Except you," Elias said quietly. The man's mouth twitched. "Except me. I go the long way. I find the old trail of my mother's people, the Ute. I lose my horse. I lose my friends. I lose my strength." He coughed again, a deep, tearing sound. "All I have left is this." He let his hand fall from the map and stared up at the sky as if checking how much daylight remained to him. Around the fire, the trapper's interest cooled when no silver ingots appeared, no saddlebags spilled coins. "Old tales," McCrae said, "Spanish ghosts, and Ute fever talk. There ain't no king's mines in Crow Country, beavers and Blackfeet. That's all that lives up here." "Still?" another man said, grinning. "Bear bait might ride after it. He's got a feelin' for lost causes." More laughter. Elias folded the map back into its rawhide shell and pressed it into the stranger's hands. "You keep it," Elias said. "Your life's tied to it more than mine." The man shook his head weakly. "My life is near gone," he said. "And the map? It belongs to the land it shows, not to my bones." His dark eyes fixed on Elias with sudden clarity. "You have eyes that see roads in stone. I saw that when you came. Take it." Elias hesitated only a moment, then slid the cord over his own head. The rawhide was warm, heavy with the sweat of other men's journeys. "Why him?" McCrae demanded. "Why give it to bear bait and not a man with sense?" "Because he listens," the stranger said simply. "Men who laugh too quickly die fast in bad country." The cough took him again, and this time it did not stop. Elias and another man tried to ease him, but within a quarter hour his chest had gone still. The engagé crossed himself clumsily. Someone pulled a blanket over the still face. The camp's talk turned, as it always did, back to hides and powder and women along the Platte. Within an hour they had the stranger's shallow grave scraped out near the Cottonwoods. By sundown, even his name, if he had given it, was gone from every tongue but Elias's, and Elias had not heard it for certain. That night, as stars pushed through the high, thin clouds, Elias sat a little apart from the others. The rawhide map lay open on his knees. Firelight licked at the inked lines and Castilian words, making them seem to shift. He traced the route with a calloused fingertip. From the South Santa Fe country, to his eye north and west, into lands he knew by other names, the Great Divide, the Wind Rivers, a twist of canyon marked with jagged strokes and the words Piedras Ardientes, burning stones. Beyond that, the clustered marks of mines, and always those 5 dots, like a catechism, repeated. Beaver were thinning. Winter would come down off those peaks soon enough, stretching its long white hand across every cut and coulee. A man who went into the high country late and came out with nothing but stories might not see spring at all. But there were other reckonings besides Beaver. Smith had proved that. So had every man who'd pushed beyond the known rivers and written what he saw. Elias folded the map and tied it tight. He felt for a moment how cold the night had grown. Behind him, someone snored. Someone else cursed softly in French at a smoke-bitten eye. Horses shifted and blew in the darkness. He stood, slung his rifle over his shoulder, and walked down to the river. Moonlight silvered the current. In its whisper he heard, or thought he heard, the words again, Las Minas del Rey Carlos. By dawn he had his mind made up. When the first gray light seeped into the east, McCrae woke to the sound of Elias cinching his saddle. "Where you ridin', bear bait?" he called from his blanket. "We still got traps to run." "Wind River way," Elias said. "I'm done scratchin' empty streams. There's country yonder I ain't seen yet." McCrae spat. "After that Spaniard's fool map, you'll freeze on some rock ledge chasin' King Silver that never was." "Maybe." Elias put his foot in the stirrup. The rawhide bundle lay warm against his chest. "Maybe I'll just find out what kind of men drew it." He swung into the saddle. No one rose to join him. A few watched from their blankets, amusement and pity mingled in their eyes. To them, he was riding into a story that had already been told and found wanting. Elias turned his horse toward the shadowed line of the Wind River Range, where the peaks still held their late summer snow like old secrets. Alone, with a dead man's map against his heart and a campful of doubts at his back, he nudged his mount into a steady walk. The others went back to sleep, certain he was chasing a myth. The mountains, as always, reserved their own opinion. The Wind River Range rose ahead of Elias like a wall built by giants, their granite shoulders catching the first fire of dawn. The peaks looked close enough to touch, but a man could ride 3 days before he reached the first true incline. Distances in the high country were liars, shapes bent the eye, valleys hid their length, and ridges folded over one another like the backs of sleeping buffalo. Elias rode north along a faint Shoshone trail, the kind kept alive not by men but by elk hooves and habit. His horse, a tough bay called Bristleback, stepped carefully over the broken shale. Sagebrush brushed Elias's leggings, leaving a resinous scent that mixed with the cool air flowing off the mountains. He stopped occasionally to compare the land before him with the rawhide map pressed against his shirt. The inked lines were crooked, the proportions strange, but something about the drawing felt true. Spanish maps often stretched or twisted country to match the memory of old conquistadors who measured miles by pain, not distance. One mark caught his eye again and again, 5 dots clustered like the pips on a dice. On Smith's copied page, those dots meant ore veins or worked rock. Here they were scattered across the rawhide in a faint arc that led toward the northern spur of the Wind Rivers. "That's no priest's doodle," Elias muttered to himself. By midday he reached a small meadow thick with Indian paintbrush and late summer fireweed. A trail of hoofprints crossed the grass. Shoshone ponies, a half-dozen or more, heading east. Elias dismounted, crouched, and pressed his fingers to the tracks. Fresh, maybe a day old. Hooves sharp-edged, not worn. Hunters, likely. Families moved with softer tread. He scanned the tree line and saw no sign of them, but he raised his hand in greeting anyway. "I travel alone," he called softly into the stillness. No trouble meant. The mountains answered only with the creak of a lodgepole bending in the wind. He rode on. As the sun dropped toward the western ridges, he came upon something half-hidden beneath a juniper. At first he thought it a fallen branch. Then Bristleback snorted and sidestepped, ears pinned back. It was a spur. Elias knelt, brushed away the needles, and turned it over in his hand. The metal was rusted, the rowel barely clinging to the frame, but the shape was unmistakable broad U-shaped heel-band, straight shank, and the faintest hint of scrolling around the edge. Spanish. Not the kind traded by French voyageurs, but older 18th century cavalry style. What in God's name was it doing this far north? He slipped it into his saddlebag, mounted again, and followed the slope upward. The trail narrowed as it climbed into granite country. Ponderosas thinned. Wind scoured the rocks clean. Near sundown he reached a ridge overlooking a narrow valley. Smoke curled from a distant fire, just a thread of it, pale against the blue shadow. Too thin for a camp, too steady for lightning-struck timber. He watched for several minutes before guiding Bristleback downhill. At the bottom of the valley he found the source, not a camp, but a cairn of stones built waist-high around a hollow. In the hollow burned a small fire feeding on pitchwood. Beside it stood 3 Shoshone hunters, bows in hand. One of them held out a palm, signaling peace. Elias dismounted slowly and lifted both hands. "Evenin' to you," he said. "Trail's yours if you want it." The eldest of the 3 stepped forward. His eyes were hard but not unkind. "Why does a lone trapper ride toward the mountains so late in the summer?" he asked in slow English. "Your kind follows Beaver, not stone." Elias weighed his answer. "I follow a map," he said finally. "Old, Spanish-made, shows trails through your country." The men exchanged glances. The eldest nodded. "There were Spaniards here once, long ago. They took men from our villages, made them dig in the hot canyons. Many died." Another hunter spat into the dust. "The earth closed over them." "Good," Elias asked. "Do you know a canyon of burning stones?" The eldest hunter's expression changed a shadow-crossing stone. "We know it. We do not go there. Spirits walk. Iron rises from the ground like teeth. It is not a place for men who wish to return." Elias felt the rawhide map heavy on his chest. "The Spaniard who carried this died on the green," he said. "He told me to follow the trail." "You should leave it," the hunter said. "Some trails are made by men who feared what chased them." A cold wind slid down the valley. Somewhere high above, a rock cracked loose and rolled, echoing through the canyon. Elias thanked the hunters and rode on. As the darkness settled, he made camp beneath an overhang of rock. The fire was small, the night was not. Before sleep took him, he listened to the mountains breathe. The land had grown still, too still. Even the night birds held their tongues. Somewhere in that silence, Elias felt a truth settle in his bones. He was not the only one following the map. And something older than any Spaniard was watching him from the dark. The next morning broke cold enough to rim the grass with silver. Elias woke to Bristleback, snorting uneasily, ears stiff, nostrils flared toward the timberline. The bay had survived more winters than most men and did not spook without reason. Elias rose slowly, eased his long rifle into his hands, and listened. Nothing. Just the wind threading through the lodgepoles. But bears could move quieter than smoke when they wished. He kicked dirt over the last coals of his fire, cinched his saddle, and moved out. As he climbed the slope, he found the first sign, a stone the size of a child's head turned over, the underside still damp with grubs. The ground held a shallow depression where something massive had bedded down. A few strides farther, he saw claw marks rake down the trunk of a ponderosa fresh, sap still glistening. The gouges reached higher than Elias could stretch. He exhaled through his teeth. Redback. He had heard the stories the crows told around their winter fires, of a grizzly boar that rolled in the iron-rich muds of the volcanic flats, staining his fur a rusty copper. A bear enormous enough to flip buffalo calves with one paw. Hunters claimed he carried musket balls in his hide like pebbles in a pouch. A dozen trappers swore they'd glimpsed him. 2 had not returned at all. Elias studied the marks. The height, the spread of the claws, the depth of the furrow, this was no ordinary bear. And from the tracks leading upslope, he was moving in the same direction Elias needed to go. Damnable luck, Elias murmured, though there was no malice in it. Bears were part of the mountains, same as snow and stone. By mid-morning he reached a small basin ringed with spruce. The place felt wrong the moment he rode in. Too quiet. No chickadees in the branches, no chipmunks chattering, not even the distant thud of elk hooves. Only the wind, restless and thin. Then Bristleback froze, legs locked. His ears flattened. His whole body trembled, not in fear, but in the raw, ancient knowledge of a predator close at hand. Elias slid off the saddle, long rifle ready. "Easy, boy!" A branch snapped in the timber, a heavy one. Then a low huff rolled across the basin, the sound a bear made when it tasted a scent worth considering. Elias backed toward a rock outcrop, keeping the rifle's muzzle steady. Another huff, closer this time. He could feel it in his ribs. Then the brush parted. Redback emerged like a creature shaped out of the mountain itself. The stories had not lied. The grizzly stood nearly 4 feet at the shoulder, his reddish hide thick with mats of iron mud. A torn ear hung partly folded, healed over from some long-ago fight. His eyes were small, black, and cold with the detached curiosity of an apex beast that feared nothing that breathed. He stared at Elias as though deciding whether the 2-legged creature before him was meal, threat, or inconvenience. Elias did not move. Bears saw motion more than shape. He kept his breathing slow, rifle low but ready. If the beast charged, he'd have one chance, maybe. The bear shifted his weight. Elias's fingers tightened on the trigger. Then a shout rang from the ridge above. 3 crows appeared among the rocks, bows drawn, their cries slicing the air. Redback reared, snarling thunder. Arrows whistled, striking his flank. Not deep enough to kill, just enough to anger. The grizzly lunged not at Elias, but at the ridge, climbing with terrifying speed. The crows scattered like quail flushed from grass. One slipped. Redback's paw swept toward him. Elias fired. The crack echoed through the basin. Smoke drifted from his barrel. The ball struck the bear's shoulder, staggering him but not stopping him. Redback wheeled, confused by pain and new sense. Growling, he retreated into the timber, crashing through brush until the sound faded. Elias lowered the rifle, heart pounding. The eldest crow descended the ridge, breathing hard. He looked Elias over with sharp eyes. "You stand in the path of a spirit bear," he said. "Foolish or brave. Sometimes the same thing." "Didn't have much choice," Elias replied. The crow nodded once. "Come, you are wounded." Elias looked down. Blood seeped through a tear in his sleeve. He hadn't even felt the claws graze in the moment. Small wound, but deep. The crow hunters led him to their camp a mile away, a sheltered bowl ringed by rocks, with a fire burning cleanly and horses picketed nearby. They tended his wound with spruce gum and cloth torn from a trade shirt. As the sun dipped behind the peaks, an elder arrived thin, with hair braided in silver-gray ropes. He studied Elias long before speaking. "You have met Redback," the elder said in Shoshone-accented Crow. He is not just a bear, he is memory. He walks the same ground his fathers walked. The Spaniards feared them. Many died running from such beasts. Elias glanced at the rawhide map hanging from his neck. You know of the Spaniards' trails? The elder's eyes narrowed. I know the canyon they entered. I know the screams that came out. Silence followed, heavy as snowfall. You follow their path, the elder said at last. But know this, Elias Boone Hardesty read back, walks it too, and he guards what the mountain swallowed. If you go on, you may meet him again. Few survive twice. Elias's hand brushed the map. Its edges felt warm, almost alive. I reckon I'll take that chance, he said softly. The elder stared a moment longer, then gave a slow nod, respect or pity. Elias could not tell. Then walk with caution, the old man said, for the mountains have chosen to remember you, and they rarely remember men kindly. That night, as firelight danced along the granite walls, Elias lay awake listening to the distant, mournful roar of a bear echoing across the peaks. Redback was still out there, and he was not done with him. 2 days after the encounter with Redback, Elias parted ways with the Crow hunters. Their warnings lingered in his mind, but so did the maps pull an almost physical tug in his chest toward the high country. He rode into a land where the wind rivers broke into a maze of ridges and volcanic scars country few trappers bothered with. Beaver did not favor such places, neither did men. The first sign he'd entered the region marked Piedras Ardientes, came at midday, a thin plume of steam rising from a cleft in the earth, white against the blue sky. As he drew closer, the ground grew warm beneath Bristleback's hooves. The air held a sulphurous tang, faint but unmistakable, like spent gunpowder mixed with rotten eggs. He dismounted beside a pool no wider than a wagon wheel. The water bubbled from unseen depths, its surface rippling with small bursts that sent steam drifting. Moss along the edges had turned a sickly yellow. A raven landed on a nearby rock, croaked once, then flew off as if the very air offended it. Burning stones, Elias murmured, remembering the Spaniard's words. Following the map's markings, he led Bristleback along a narrow ravine flanked by boulders blackened as if from ancient fire. In places the rock seemed melted, fused into shapes no cold-weather mountain should know. The scent of sulphur thickened, steam vented from fractures, sighing like distant breaths. Soon the ravine widened into a basin ringed by shale cliffs, and there, half collapsed against the far wall, lay something that stopped Elias' cold stonework. Not natural, not indigenous. No mountain tribe carved such perfectly squared blocks. A chimney of fitted stones rose 10 feet before crumbling away. Beside it lay the remnants of a furnace built from rock and clay, an opening wide enough for a man to crawl into. Scattered all around were the rusted scraps of tools, a broken pickaxe head, a shovel blade eaten by time, nails curled and flaking. Spanish. No, doubt remained. The conquistadors, or whatever men came north generations later, had reached this far into the wind rivers. Elias knelt, brushing soil from a long iron spike. The workmanship matched what he'd seen at old outposts near Taos. Thick, low-carbon steel, hammered by hand, not cast. A chill crept up his spine despite the heat rising from the ground. He walked deeper into the site, studying the layout. The Spaniards had dug into the canyon wall, carving 2 adits that now yawned like the mouths of beasts. One was half filled with rubble. The other lay open, though a sour draft of air drifted from its depths. His fingers brushed something soft at the cave mouth, rotting leather. He lifted it gently. A boot, its style unmistakably European, the heel nailed in the old Iberian fashion. The sole was cracked, the tongue eaten by rodents. Yet it had endured. He found other relics nearby, a brass button, a piece of rosary bead carved from bone, and, half buried in silt, a scrap of parchment sealed between 2 stones. He eased it free with the point of his knife. The fragment was brittle, the ink faded, but enough remained to read. Tres muertos hoy, las piedras respiran fuego, el oso rojo nos sigue. 3 dead today. The stones breathe fire. The red bear follows us. Elias's breath caught. The Spaniards had written of a red bear long before the tribe spoke of Redback's ghostly line. Whatever lineage stalked these mountains was older than both Spaniard and trapper memory. As he tucked the parchment safely inside his coat, Bristleback suddenly snorted and backed away, ears pinned flat. Elias froze. The horse stared toward the ridge above the basin, muscles quivering. Footsteps. Not animal. Not careful enough to be Indian. Men. Elias moved silently behind the ruins of the stone chimney and peered upward. 3 figures crested the ridge trappers. From the look of them, he recognized one. Harp McLennan, a free trapper known for switching allegiances as often as shirts. The other 2 he didn't know, but their movements told him enough. They weren't here by accident. They scanned the basin with hungry eyes. "Damn," Elias whispered. Someone must have overheard camp gossip about the map, or followed his tracks. Harp's voice drifted down, too loud for this quiet place. "Told you the Spaniards dug here. All we gotta do is pick up where they left off. Silver's silver, even if dead men found it first." Elias's jaw tightened. Men like Harp would tear open the mountains, disturb graves, stoke fights with tribes, and leave nothing but trouble behind. He slipped back toward Bristleback, keeping low behind a fallen slab of basalt. But before he could reach the horse, one of the rival trappers shouted, "Hold up tracks!" Boots scuffed. Men descended. The chase was on. Elias swung into the saddle as the first rifle cracked. The ball sparked off stone inches from his knee. Bristleback lunged forward, Elias, gripping the reins tight as they thundered across the basin. A second shot echoed. A third. Steam vents hissed like angry spirits. Rocks tumbled beneath the horse's hooves. Elias didn't fire back. Not here, not in ground that shifted beneath its own heat. He guided Bristleback into the shadowed mouth of a narrow side canyon. A foolish place to hide unless one knew from the map that it twisted sharply, offering cover. Behind him, Harp cursed. "He went in there!" The canyon narrowed to a slot no wider than 2 men. Heat radiated from cracks in the walls, sweat beading on Elias's brow. The air shimmered and the sulfur thickened. A boom echoed distant but powerful. The earth trembled underfoot. A geothermal vent had released somewhere deeper in the canyon system. The sound startled the rival trappers. Their shouts turned panicked. "Back! Back out!" Elias didn't wait to hear more. He spurred Bristleback into a gallop through the twisting slot, trusting the rawhide, map's crude lines. Behind him, stone cracked, a rumble built, and a collapse roared through the canyon, swallowing the path he'd taken. When the dust settled, silence returned, heavy as a judgment. Elias slowed Bristleback and drew a long breath. The path behind him was sealed. Ahead, the canyon widened slightly, revealing a faint, sunlit rise. He touched the rawhide map through his shirt. The burning stones were behind him. The route to the hidden valley lay ahead, and if rivals had come this far, more would follow. But Elias Boone Hardesty rode on, knowing he had crossed the threshold into a land few men living or dead had ever trespassed. And none had returned from willingly. The canyon walls widened by slow degrees until the sky, once a narrow strip of pale blue, opened into a vast alpine bowl. Elias reined in Bristleback on a rocky ledge and stared in silence. Below him lay a hidden valley no map of the American West had ever marked, a place ringed by stone ramparts, accessible only through the collapsed canyon he had just escaped. The valley floor shimmered with late summer grass and the pale glint of quartz seams. At its center ran a ribbon of water, clear as cut glass, fed by snowmelt cascading from distant cliffs. But it was what lay near the stream that made Elias's breath catch. Stone structures ruined, ancient, half-consumed by lichen and time. Low walls of fitted blocks, a collapsed forge, what might once have been a long hut or barracks, and farther still, carved directly into the cliff's base, a dark, rectangular tunnel mouth braced by timber posts blackened with age. A mine shaft. The lost Spanish mines. He dismounted, leading Bristleback down the steep descent. Each step brought the ruins into clearer focus. Rusted ore carts lay overturned in the grass. A scatter of slag piled near the stream glimmered with silvery flecks. Wooden rails lay rotted into splinters, but their lines still traced the mine's old pathways. Elias knelt beside a stone block bearing a faint mark, a royal stamp, nearly worn smooth, a crowned shield, a stylized cross. "Carlos," he whispered. "King Charles of Spain." The map had not lied. The Spaniards had come this far north, nearly a century before anyone believed possible. The mines were real. The canyon of burning stones was real. The old wanderer's dying words were not fever dreams, but memory. Elias's fingers shook as he sketched the ruins into his journal angles, distances, notes on construction. Larpenteur had written that a man's value in the mountains was measured by what he could record, as well as what he could carry. Elias meant to bring back truth, not treasure. The wind shifted, carrying a scent that made Bristleback's head shoot up. Blood. Elias rose slowly, rifle ready. At first, he saw nothing. Then something caught the corner of his eye near the collapsed forge a boot, the toe pointing skyward. He approached with cautious steps. One of the rival trappers lay half buried in rubble, his chest crushed by a fallen timber. His rifle lay several feet away, untouched. His eyes were open, glassy. A second body lay near the creek, throat torn open so savagely the man's scarf was in ribbons. Elias didn't need tracks to know what had done it. A deep growl rolled across the valley. He turned. Redback stood on a low rise, head lowered, shoulders rolling with slow, deliberate menace. The bear's copper-stained fur caught the sun in a terrible glow. One arrow still jutted from his flank, the shaft broken. Fresh blood streaked his jaw. The beast looked even larger than Elias remembered. The bear huffed, the sound vibrating through the ground. Elias backed toward the mine entrance, but Redback advanced slow, certain, claiming the valley as his own. "Easy now," Elias murmured, lifting his rifle. The long rifle was good, but a single shot was all it gave him. A man got only one chance against a bear like this. The grizzly rose onto his hind legs, blocking half the sky. His roar shook loose dust from the cliff. Elias aimed for the one place Smith's journal said mattered, the soft point just inside the shoulder. The bear dropped forward into a charge. Elias fired. The boom punched the valley. Smoke filled his vision. He reloaded by feel-pour, patch, ram, but the charging thunder of paws was already on him. Then Redback stumbled. The great bear crashed to his knees, slid through the churned grass, and came to rest only paces from Elias, breath hissing in ragged bursts. The bullet had struck true. The mountains held their silence as the beast died. Elias lowered the rifle, chest heaving, sweat and fear mixing with the sharp scent of powder. He had survived Redback a second time. No man got such a gift twice. And now, with the bear fallen and the truth of the mines beneath his feet, Elias understood something with cold clarity. Men would kill for this place. Unless someone stopped them. He tightened his grip on the rawhide map. He would not let the mountains bleed again. He would not let the Spaniard's curse return. And he would not let this valley's secret fall into the wrong hands. Elias buried Red back at the valley's edge, piling stones over the great bear until the mound resembled a cairn. It felt wrong to leave such a creature to scavengers. The grizzly had ruled these mountains longer than any trapper, longer than the Spaniards, maybe longer than the tribe's oldest stories remembered. The least Elias could do was grant him a grave that would not be kicked open by wolves. When he finished, the wind shifted, carrying the high, metallic scent of the mine shafts. The valley had grown quiet now, no bear, no rival trappers, only the whisper of water over stone. Elias walked once more among the ruins, noting every detail into his journal. The width of the smelter pit, the angle of the collapsed cart rails, the timbers cut in the old Spanish style. These records were worth more than any ingot. As he worked, a dull ache settled deep in his shoulder. The graze from Redback's earlier attack throbbed, but he ignored it. Pain was simply another mountain companion. He gathered what small artifacts he could safely carry: a rusted spur, the parchment scrap, a few carved stones with symbols etched into them, and wrapped them carefully. Anything larger, Anything that hinted at wealth, he left buried under centuries of dust. Silver brought greed, and greed brought death. The valley had seen enough of both. By noon he saddled Bristleback and took one last look at the hidden basin. The place felt ancient, as if the earth had grown around the bones of the mine long before any man named it. Elias touched the rawhide map at his chest. "This ends with me," he said quietly. He spurred Bristleback toward the narrow exit canyon, the only way out since the collapse. The slot canyon walls pressed close, funneling wind that carried the scent of ash and snow. Elias kept his rifle across his lap and eyes sharp. Harp McLennan and the others might have survived the collapse. Greed made men persistent. Hours passed. The canyon spat him onto the shoulder of a high plateau. From there he could see the entire sweep of the Wind River's ridges stacked to the horizon, snow peaks like jagged teeth. Storms brewed to the west, dark bellies dragging across the sky. A cold wind clawed at his coat. "Winter's comin' early," he muttered. He pressed on. By late afternoon he reached an open basin where a herd of elk grazed. Their presence was comforting, no human tracks disturbed the ground. But as he crossed the basin, he spotted something half buried in snowmelt mud. A boot print. Fresh. Not his. Elias dismounted, examining it. Deep heel, narrow toe. Company made. Someone had followed him out of the canyon or skirted the mountains to intercept him. He scanned the ridges. Nothing moved. He mounted again and urged Bristleback into a steady trot. The clouds thickened, dropping the first flakes of snow. The wind sharpened, slicing down the slopes like a whetted knife. Elias pulled his coat tighter. He still had days to reach South Pass and longer to reach Fort Laramie. Winter travel could break a strong man. It could kill a weary one. As evening approached, snow blurred the world into shades of white and slate. He sought shelter beneath a sandstone overhang. Bristleback shivered beside the fire as Elias fed it what little wood he had gathered. He ate strips of jerky and raw deer fat, letting the grease warm him from inside. Larpenteur had written that fat kept a man alive better than any prayer, and Elias believed him. Thunder rumbled far off. Snow fell quicker. He unrolled his journal, shielding it from the flakes. In careful script he documented all he had seen, every ruin, every mark, every trace of Spanish craft. These pages were the true treasure, not the silver buried in the valley. When he finished writing, he lifted the rawhide map. The edges were frayed, the ink stains blurred by rain, sweat, and blood. This thing had led men to greatness and graves alike. Elias fed the corner of the map into the fire. It caught slowly, curling at the edges before the flames devoured it. He watched it burn, feeling a strange weight lift from his shoulders. "No more," he whispered. The storm howled outside the overhang. Bristleback pressed closer, trusting him in the dark. Come morning, men would still hunt him. The mountains would still test him. Winter would still want its due. But no one else would ever find the Valley of the King Silver. Elias Boone Hardesty intended to be the last man to walk among its ghosts. By the time Elias reached the long, rolling grasslands east of South Pass, winter had settled into the earth like a buried blade. Every night the ground froze solid. Every morning Bristleback's breath rose in white plumes. The big bay moved stiffly under the weight of ice clinging to his mane and tail. Elias wasn't much better, his coat crusted with frost, his beard stiff, his fingers stiffening whenever he paused, too long to rest. But he kept moving. A man who stopped in such cold stayed stopped. He crossed the Sweetwater under a haze of blowing snow and rode east toward the wide fork of the Platte. Game grew scarce, and twice he went to bed hungry. He chewed old jerky until his jaw ached. Once, in a low draw not far from Devil's Gate, a band of wolves shadowed him, silent as smoke. He kept his rifle across his knees and a fire beside him until dawn drove them off. By the third week, the weather softened barely, but enough that he could push harder. The land sloped downward, cottonwoods returned, buffalo trails scarred the prairie. With every mile, the scent of civilization crept in, distant smoke, horses other than his own, the faint tang of iron tools and human habitation. One morning, just past daybreak, he crested a low ridge and saw it. Fort Laramie, its stout adobe walls and timber roofs gleamed pale in the early light. Smoke drifted lazily from chimneys. Voices carried over the still air shouts, laughter, the clatter of tack. A wagon team creaked through the gate. The sight hit Elias harder than he expected. Months of solitude, danger, hunger, and cold tightened into something that felt almost like relief. He nudged Bristleback forward. As he rode into the yard, two soldiers paused in their chores, staring. Elias imagined what they saw: a man gaunt from winter travel, coat torn at the shoulder where Redback had marked him, face hollowed by hunger, boots stained with volcanic ash and mountain mud. His rifle was tied with a strip of rawhide where the stock had cracked. A long scar across his cheek caught the light like a pale knife stroke. "Sir," one soldier ventured, "you look like you just crawled out of the mountains." Elias dismounted slowly. "I did." Inside the main hall, a lieutenant of the U.S. Army listened as Elias laid out the evidence, the map's remnants, the artifacts, the journal, the Spanish boot buckle, the carved rosary bead, the sketches of the mine shafts. Elias placed each item on the table with a steady hand. The lieutenant flipped through the journal pages, his brow furrowing. "You expect us to believe Spaniards worked mines in the high Rockies?" he asked. "Up near the Wind Rivers?" Elias shrugged. "Believe what you want. I wrote what I saw." Another officer picked up the brass button, rubbing the royal insignia with his thumb. "This mark. I've seen similar pieces catalogued in Santa Fe archives, old Spanish frontier units." He looked at Elias with new respect. "This is no forgery." The lieutenant shifted uncomfortably, realizing the truth was heavier than his skepticism. "But where," he asked, "are the mines now?" "Buried," Elias answered. "Collapsed, and it's best left that way." The officers exchanged glances. Men paid for silver, men killed for it. Elias saw the hunger building in their eyes and closed his journal with a firm snap. "I ain't leading anyone back," he said softly. "Not for all the coin in St. Louis." The lieutenant studied him. A wise decision. Word spread fast through the fort. By evening, trappers gathered near the cook fire to stare at the man they once mocked. "Bear bait," they whispered, "the fool who chased ghost trails." The man, Redback, mauled and lived. "He killed the red grizzly," someone murmured. "Found the king's mines. Walked out of the high country after winter had already swallowed the passes. Hardesty ain't a man, he's a story." Elias ignored the whispers. He packed fresh supplies, patched his coat with proper cloth, sharpened his knife, and fed Bristleback until the animal's ribs no longer showed. That night, he stood outside the fort walls, staring west. The mountains glowed faintly under starlight, their peaks cold, aloof, eternal. Stories grew behind him. But the mountains called ahead. He swung into the saddle. Some men chased legend, some men became it. Elias Boone Hardesty simply rode on, following the only compass he'd ever trusted. The pull of wild country untouched by any king, Spanish or otherwise.